Good morning.
How is everyone?
Good.
I did. Hey, break out the cigar. Didn't say that, we're being recorded. Just kidding. I have news. Make sure you get a bulletin. They're back on the foyer. There's a lot of really important stuff that I want to talk about. There are some sign-up sheets in the foyer. We're going to attempt a trunk or treat this year, and we need everybody, I mean everybody, to sign up for something. You'll notice a couple of items in the bulletin regarding trunk or treat. We're going to have chili and hot dogs in here. So I think I have like spots for 3 people to volunteer to take care of that. Make sure it's done.
Should I pass it around?
We could. We're asking everybody to bring a dessert. Also, we need some volunteers to man the fire pit out back and with some s'mores. I think I have about 3 sign-up spots for that. It is a costume event. You don't have to. Some of you already have good enough costumes. Pretty scary.
That's not very nice.
Yeah, but if you're in the mood and you would like to, I may take these off and show you my Superman outfit underneath. Take my glasses off.
Clark Kent.
Yeah, no. Anyway, we need some judges. If you'd like to be 3 categories: best trunk decoration. By the way, we need all the cars we can get. Decorate your trunk a little bit. Go to Pinterest, find some ideas. Tons of them, cheap, good. Let's pass out some candy to the kids. We are collecting candy. There's a big bucket in the foyer, but also you might want to bring some just in case. Best trunk decoration, best kid costume, best adult costume, and best group costumes. If you would like to be a judge for those, and or provide prizes for those, put your name down on the sign-up sheet and tell me what you'd like to do out there. Thoughts, questions on that? Next Sunday afternoon, evening. That is next Sunday, right? 31st?
Yes.
Okay. Also, there's a chili cook-off coming up in November. Sign up for that. Lots of signing up. Anything else we need to be announcing this morning? Gentlemen, look to see if your name is in the worship roster, whatever you want to call it. We've been studying the 10 Commandments. We have covered all 10 commands, plus an introductory lesson. The conclusion may last a few weeks as well. That is today. I want us to start in Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. Matthew 5 and verse 20, where Jesus says, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." When you read those words, what do you think of?
Nobody.
What?
Nobody.
Nobody can do it, right? They're tough. Those are tough words. "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." I want you to imagine you go out and you buy a beautiful, brand new whirlpool freezer. Okay? How many of you need one?
Give them away.
No, you go out and buy it. You're so proud. It gets delivered to your house. You know it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. You can stock up on meat purchased in bulk prices. So the day arrives, it gets delivered, but you're busy. You've got a busy week. It's delivered, and you've got it down in your basement or in your garage or wherever, and you go to a meat locker and you buy a side of beef and you bring it home and fill that whirlpool to the brim. But you were busy. But you're thinking, man, I'm in for some good eating over the next few months. I've got meat. Well, about a week later, you go down to the basement, you get some steaks out. What do you discover?
You didn't plug it in.
You forgot to plug it in. That freezer still looks beautiful on the outside, of course. It's brand new. But what happened when you opened it up? You could just die, right? Because a side of beef is not cheap. And it's gone. It's awful. What's happening on the outside and what's happening on the inside are two totally different stories, right? Instead of beauty on the inside, you've got rottenness and decay. The outside looks fine. Jesus said the Pharisees in his day were a lot like that freezer. They looked good on the outside, but the inside was awful. It was rotten, decayed, putrid, rotten to the core on the inside. His negative statement about them is in the context of a larger lesson. And it is in the context of the Ten Commandments, the law of Moses. Let's read it now in its greater context. This is an easy to read version, and I chose this because it really brings something out that I want to bring out. Starting in verse 17. Don't think that I have come to destroy the law of Moses. What does your more traditional version say?
Prophets.
The prophets? But what?
The law of the prophets.
The law of the prophets. But what did he not want to do to it?
Abolish.
Abolish it. Which, when you think of abolish, what do you think of?
Do away with.
Do away with. He said, I didn't come to destroy, to abolish the law of Moses or the teaching of the prophets. I have come not to destroy the teachings, but what?
Fulfill them.
Fulfill, the more traditional version says, I have come to give full meaning to them. That's what I like about this version. I have come to give full meaning to the old law. What does that mean?
Flesh it out.
Flesh it out, okay?
To make people understand it.
To make you understand it.
The folk was not participating in the full view.
Yes, yes. They were more of a checklist mentality with the law. Okay, I know it says this, so I've done this, I'm good. But Jesus says, no, but I came not to destroy it, not to get rid of it, not to abolish it. Now, don't misunderstand. The text does say, the Bible does say, he nailed it to the cross. So there was an end point. That's why you didn't bring a lamb this morning, or some doves or whatever. There was an end point. But he says, I came to fulfill it. I came to give it meaning. I think another way of saying this is I came to give it depth. Here's what it says. You know what it says, but you don't know what it means. And that's what I came to do. So he says, I live my life perfectly according to the law. Not the Pharisaical law. He broke that a lot. But God's law, the law of Moses, he kept because he was the author of it. He knows what it means. Don't think that I have come to destroy the law of Moses or the teaching of the prophets. I have come not to destroy their teachings, but to give full meaning to them. I assure you that nothing will disappear from the law until heaven and earth are gone. The law will not lose even the smallest letter or the smallest part of a letter. More traditional says jot and tittle. Not a jot, not a tittle, which is basically it had to do, those are markings in the Hebrew language. It would be kind of similar to our dotting an I and crossing a T. Not even the smallest letter or the smallest part of a letter until it has all been done. That's what he came to do. And it's also kind of what he means when he's hanging on the cross and says, it is finished. I've done it. And remember, when he hangs on the cross, he is bringing in a new covenant. The old covenant is now fulfilled. The new covenant begins. Thus, the criminal on the cross, they're still under the old covenant. That's why Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. When he dies and he's resurrected, there's a kind of a time period, a transitional period in there. That's when the new covenant is going to begin. But having said all that, watch verse 19. A person should obey every command in the law, even one that doesn't seem important. Whoever refuses to obey any command and teaches others not to obey it, it will be the least important in God's kingdom. But whoever obeys the law and teaches others to obey it will be great in God's kingdom. I tell you that you must do better than the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. If you're not more pleasing to God than they are, you will never enter God's kingdom. Wow. Putting this in its context, we have to understand who's writing, who he is writing to, what he's writing about. Don't just take a paragraph in Scripture and say, oh man, that sounds good. I'm going to build my church, my theology, and everything I do to worship around this one paragraph. That's a mistake. So who's writing this? Matthew. Well, it's Jesus talking, but Matthew's writing it down. So let's do a quick recap. We studied this a few times. You have 4 Gospels, right?
Matthew.
3 of them are synoptics. Which ones are synoptic? Which means kind of the same.
Matthew, Mark, Luke.
Yeah, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the 3 synoptics. John is different. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are all identical, with very few exceptions. Mark wrote his first. How do we know that? Because all of Mark, word for word, is in Matthew and Luke. Okay? So if all of Mark is in Matthew and Luke, that tells us they took Mark's gospel, his story, and based on their audiences, they start adding in, because they have different emphasis. So Luke is writing to Gentiles, specifically to, he has a name, Theophilus. And he's writing to Gentiles. And he is bringing out the same story that Mark wrote, but he's bringing out more of Jesus is a shepherd. And you're a sheep in his flock. That's Luke's emphasis. Matthew is writing to not a person, but a group of people. Which group of people? The Jewish people. And he has a certain emphasis, and he is focusing on kingship. He's writing about Jesus not so much as shepherd, but as king. That's why he starts out with the genealogies. And the story of the wise men and the birth story. And see, Luke doesn't do that. But here is Matthew, and he's writing about Jesus is king. Keep that in this context. Matthew is also writing to Jewish Christians. Don't forget that. They come from a Jewish background. They have a heritage, and it's important to them. And they've been doing this for thousands of years, and now all of a sudden they are being ushered into a new covenant, but the old covenant's hanging on because of their traditions. They don't want to let go of it. It's hard to let go of something that you've had for thousands of years. It's part of your DNA. It's part of who you are. And a part of who they are, the Pharisees have been crucial, right? The Pharisees have been their leaders, their teachers, the keepers of the law. And they have incredible influence over them. But they are also hypocrites. And the only group of people that riled up Jesus' anger, his temper, the only ones that got him kind of raising his voice and shouting or fashioning a whip and whipping them or calling them names, he did that. You brood of vipers, you whitewashed sepulchres or whatever, however you say that, the religious leaders of the day. Nobody else got his blood going quite like they did, because they were hypocrites. And Matthew wants to emphasize that's wrong. Don't do that. Unless your righteousness, unless your right living, that's what righteousness means, right living, unless your right living surpasses that of the Pharisees, you're not going to get into this kingdom. Basically, he's saying they're not getting into this kingdom. Now, there were a few exceptions, right? We know of a couple of exceptions in the Pharisaical world. Joseph, Nicodemus, a couple of exceptions. So it wasn't just a 100% all of you, and there may have been others. In fact, there probably were others that bought into what Jesus was teaching. Matthew is trying to bring out to them, don't listen to the Pharisees. They have added burdens and laws that shouldn't be there. Jesus is the proper interpreter of the law. He's the author of it. He wrote it. So listen to him. And when he says, I know you've heard this, but let me tell you what this means, listen to him. Don't listen to the Pharisees. So if Matthew, if they had a church bulletin and he had to put a sermon title in the bulletin that week, he probably is calling it Righteousness Inside. You can't just have right living on the outside, you have to have it on the inside. So you can't just say, don't murder. You have to do what? According to Jesus. You can't just not murder. You have to love them. You can't hate them. You have to love them. So this is the meat of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:17 through 20. And he says, your righteousness has to surpass that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And the rest of the sermon is various applications of that, showing you how you can surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees. So, for example, the next chapter, Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is saying, okay, now, let me give you some examples of right living, righteous acts. What does the life of a righteous person look like whose righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees? And he gives examples. So here is, this is what he's saying. This is what you've heard. Now let me tell you what it means. And what it means is righteousness on the inside. You may have heard an old interpretation, but that's the Pharisaical interpretation. This is Moses' interpretation. But actually, not just Moses, who wrote it? The Spirit. Or God up on the mountaintop with the tablets, with God's finger, he wrote. So the law isn't bad. It's not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying it wasn't enough. And God is the author, and God provided it. So when he says, you have heard, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not whatever, Jesus is not saying that wasn't good enough. He's just saying, hey, in the new covenant, in the new kingdom, there's more. It isn't just a checklist. It isn't just, okay, let me check this, and this. Like the rich young ruler. From my youth, I've kept these commands, but obviously his heart hadn't kept them, right? So Jesus is saying, it's not about a checklist. Let me share with you what God had in mind. Let me give it depth. We're going deeper. That's what Jesus is saying. In this new covenant, we're going deeper. Matthew 5, verses 21 and 22. You have heard that the law of Moses says, do not murder. If you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. Anything wrong with that?
No.
Not a thing. He just says, you've heard accurately. But I say, if you're angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. Death. Not a list. Not just, okay, I haven't killed anybody, I'm pretty good. Jesus says, no, let's get to the heart of the matter. Don't just not kill them. Don't hate them. Love them. Deeper obedience. Not necessarily more obedience, just deeper. The Pharisees kept tacking on more. Jesus isn't tacking on more, he's just going deeper with what's already there.
The term subject to judgment doesn't mean condemnation, it's there. It don't, otherwise there's a degree of counsel in that. I'm angry because of, and have right to be angry. Those are all considerations in the judgment. So a judgment can mean condemnation, but it can also mean consideration, like in court.
Yeah.
A lot of times, you don't know, tell you, maybe you go to court.
It may deem you innocent. Yeah. Yeah, he's just kind of being general, saying,
It's a consideration of something wrong.
yeah, yeah. Don't just not kill. Let's go deeper in the new covenant. Let's have some depth and let's get to the heart of it. And the heart is, don't even be angry with it. What's the difference between the Pharisees and Jesus? There's some other, you have heard it said. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The power behind this one is the Pharisees said a man can't even commit adultery. A woman can. That's why when they brought the female to Jesus who was caught in adultery, the man wasn't there. Because a man can't commit adultery, only a woman. That's how far they had gone. It shows you their heart wasn't in it. And Jesus says, let's go deeper. It isn't just that you have kept the list. Let's go with you now understand what it means. There's depth. You get it in your heart. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Boy, it doesn't get any easier. I felt like almost the entire time we studied the Ten Commandments, I was giving you a whipping every Sunday morning. It's just beating us up, isn't it? And then we get to Jesus, and Jesus says, oh, if you think I'm letting up on it, you got another thing coming. No, we're just going to go deeper. This is what it looks like to be a citizen in the kingdom of heaven. You get what God is trying to do. And that is make you an outstanding, upright person. Not in your own power. You don't have that power. You can't do it. No matter how hard you try, you'll fail. But this is the standard. And Jesus says, I'm going to even help you out some more. I'm going to die and pay the price for you because you failed.
Because I got played hymns over here. Romans 6 chapter 3 verse. You are
a new person all over.
Obviously, you can't do it.
Matthew 23, beginning with verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup. That is, you got your 10 commandment list out and you checked them off. I haven't done this, I haven't done this, I haven't done this. Now you change some of the laws to make sure they fit you. Oh boy, we do that at church. You know that, right? Oh, we love buffets. Let me find this church that's going to agree with my thoughts on this and this and this, and I'm going to go worship at that church. That's called tickling ears. You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, then the outside also may be clean.
What could he also be talking in this sense here, not only back to the outside of the cup and so forth, but the ceremonial lesson?
Yes, he could, because that's one of the things that he broke that they didn't like. And certainly could have that in mind as he talks about washing the dishes. That dualism, there was an immediate, exactly what he says, but there's also that heavenly, spiritual meaning. The difference between Jesus and the Pharisees, one of the fundamental differences is motive. What was the Pharisees' motive?
To improve their lot.
To improve their situation.
Power and control.
Power and control. The Pharisees had a lot of right actions, but their motive was wrong. What was Jesus' motive?
Love.
Love? To save
To
mankind?
make us better.
Make us better? That's right. There's a huge difference in why each is giving an interpretation of the law of Moses, the Ten Commandments, if you will. One, they have it good and they want to keep it that way. The other, he comes as a suffering servant and he gives an interpretation that says, do this and you will enter the kingdom of heaven.
All that is non-inclusive. Otherwise, they control the religious aspect of things. No one can actually come into that unless they okay.
Yes.
To their decision.
Whereas Jesus seems to be trying to stretch the borders and all of that. He was trying to get as many as possible.
Well, he became that personality rather than they becoming that people.
Yes.
Let people be saved.
Another difference in the Pharisees and Jesus were the major issues. What was the major issues for the Pharisees? Tradition. Make sure you wash your hands. Make sure you mark off the proper distance from your home so that you don't go a step farther on Sabbath. Make sure that, and it's all about the rituals, the traditions, the outward act. In chapter 15, they're concerned about the washing of hands, and Jesus responds, you've made a mockery of something that's very important. You've just made foolishness out of it. Why don't you consider things like honor your father and your mother? See, they didn't like that. They didn't want to do that. Because the word honor meant take care of them financially. They didn't want to do that.
I didn't think that was part of the religious aspiration to tradition because financially they were cutting into religion.
Yeah.
They were given to the temple and letting their parents start.
Right. In Matthew 23:23, Jesus said, you have neglected the more important matters of the law. Which was what? Justice, love, mercy. Instead, they paid attention to making sure you gave 1/10 of every spice that you had and all the other little trivial things that weren't nearly as important. Jesus said, you're majoring on the minors and minoring on the majors. Oh boy, I think in the churches of Christ, sometimes we are guilty of the same thing. We've got these little pet peeves that really have no business even being discussed. And we disfellowship churches or people over them. And then we overlook the major issues that we should be focusing on. Not always, sometimes. Lifestyle was a big difference in the Pharisees and Jesus. How did the Pharisees live? Wealthy, eye on the hog, eye cotton. How did Jesus live?
Down to earth, very.
Down to earth. Very down to earth. The Pharisees are intent on the outward show of religion. They're active in doing, but the heart wasn't there. Jesus says it's all about the heart. Look back at the Beatitudes. Compare the Pharisees to the Beatitudes. Do they match up?
No.
Not even a little bit. Compare the Beatitudes to Jesus. Do they match up?
That's it.
100%. The Pharisees would be the one praying out on the corner, "Dear Lord, I thank you that I am not like these other people. I'm better than they are." How did Jesus say we should pray?
In the closet, quietly.
Go into your closet, close the door, and pray, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." So we need to be careful because religion, church, can become a yoke, a burden, something that ties you down, weighs you down. It shouldn't. It should be more about a relationship with God. Sometimes I think we church folk have split personalities. Second generation Christians especially. You ever notice the difference in those that went out and lived pretty rough lives and became a Christian? You ever notice a difference in how they go about Christianity versus somebody who's a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation Christian? There's almost always a visible difference. Those second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation Christians have to grapple with tradition and heritage and rituals. Well, I tell you, I was always impressed when I was up in Rockford. We lived in the church building was in a rough neighborhood. And people would come in for the first time, never having been to church, and say, "I don't know how to do this, but I want to do it." And then sit by them and watch them sing like nobody's business. Because they feel like I have been saved from something. I was headed for hell. Now I'm saved. We'll go in a few minutes and kind of sort of mumble a few words singing. You notice we're not singing very loud? Anybody else notice? Am I the only one? And I'm the one up front. Everybody's looking. You know, your voices are coming towards me in the front. I don't hear you. I hear some of you. Okay, that's my whipping for today. 2 questions. This time is just about up. Number one, how much like the Pharisees are we? Don't answer out loud. Well, you can on this one. Go ahead. How much like the Pharisees are we? Too much, right?
More than we like to admit.
More than we will admit. Almost always, when we're studying Scripture, we as church people, religious people, should identify more with the Pharisees than anybody else in the story. But I think we're always putting ourselves with Jesus. But I think we're the ones Jesus is talking to. We're more like them than we admit. We get the motive wrong. We get the lifestyle wrong. We major on the wrong things.
Rather than saying things.
Yes.
Accordingly.
Yes. Now this one don't answer out loud. But as a person before God and on your spiritual pilgrimage, are you becoming something? Are you becoming what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount?
I'm working at it.
Working at it. That's a good way to put it. Because if your answer was, oh yeah, I've been there a long time, you need to start over.
I think the phrase is practicing.
Say it again.
Practicing Christian.
Practicing, a practicing Christian.
We've been working at it a long time.
We've been working at it a long time.
I think that's something we're going to continue to do.
Yes. Yes. It's a never-ending pilgrimage journey. And we don't need to necessarily do more, we need to go deeper. Doing more doesn't always equate to better Christianity. Going deeper equates to becoming a better citizen in the kingdom. Any final thoughts? About 2 minutes left. We'll probably continue on the same line of thought next week. I'm working on a new series of lessons for a new class, but I'm going to wait because sometimes I change my mind in the middle of that. But probably the first Sunday in November, we'll begin a new series of lessons. By the way, if you haven't joined us on Wednesday, we've got a pretty intriguing topic, I think, called Signs of the Times. Does prophecy still apply? We talked about COVID the first week. We talked about some financial things last week. Mark on the hand or the forehead, 666. It's associated with fire. If you couldn't go out and buy something unless you had that mark. Is that still applicable? This coming Wednesday, we're going to talk about a theological issue. So come and join us for that. Please go sign up on the sign-up sheets at Trunk or Treat and the chili cook-off. Thank you for coming to class. We'll take a short break. We'll gather in the auditorium for worship in just a few minutes.